The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in October 1882, informing Daniel Easton that his wife had died giving birth to their third child in Tucson, Arizona Territory, and that he needed to return home immediately from the cattle drive that had taken him nearly 200 miles north. He rode harder than he ever had in his life, pushing his horse to the limits, but by the time he reached their ranch outside of Yuma, Martha had already been buried 3 days, and his newborn daughter was struggling to survive on sugar water and the milk from a neighbor's goat. Daniel stood in the doorway of his own home feeling like a stranger, looking at his 2 older children, 5-year-old Thomas and 3-year-old Sarah, who stared back at him with hollow eyes that had seen too much grief for their tender ages. His arms felt useless at his sides as the neighbor woman, Mrs. Henderson, thrust the tiny bundle of his infant daughter into his embrace and told him she had done all she could, but she had her own family to tend to. The baby was so small, so impossibly fragile, with Martha's dark hair and his own gray eyes, and when she mewled weakly against his chest, Daniel felt something crack open inside him that he did not know how to repair. "Her name is Emma," Mrs. Henderson said, gathering her shawl. "Martha named her before she passed. I am sorry for your loss, Daniel, truly I am, but I cannot stay longer. My husband needs me at home." After she left, Daniel stood in the center of the small ranch house with the baby in his arms and his 2 older children clinging to his legs, and he realized with a terror that dwarfed anything he had ever felt facing down stampeding cattle or rattlesnakes, that he had absolutely no idea how to do this alone. Thomas was crying silently, his small shoulders shaking, and Sarah kept asking when Mama was coming back, and the baby needed to eat, and the house was a disaster, and there were animals to tend, and crops that needed harvesting, and Daniel Easton, who had survived everything the Arizona Territory could throw at a man, felt himself breaking apart. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Daniel's life. He tried everything he could think of to care for Emma, but she continued to weaken despite his best efforts with the goat's milk. Thomas had nightmares every night and would wake screaming for his mother. Sarah stopped talking altogether. Daniel was surviving on maybe 2 hours of sleep, running the ranch during the day and trying to be both mother and father at night, and failing spectacularly at all of it. He burned meals, forgot to change diapers, snapped at the children when he did not mean to, and spent his nights walking the floor with a crying baby while grief and exhaustion and fear ate him alive from the inside out. He knew he needed help. He needed someone who knew how to care for an infant, who could comfort his children, who could bring some semblance of order back to their shattered lives. The problem was that unmarried women were scarce in Yuma, and the ones who were available were either too young, too old, or had made it clear they had no interest in taking on a widower with 3 grieving children. Daniel had never felt more helpless or alone. It was old Miguel, his ranch hand, who finally brought up the subject Daniel had been avoiding. They were mending fence on the north pasture while the children stayed with Miguel's wife for the afternoon, and Miguel said quietly in his accented English, "You need a wife, Daniel. Those children need a mother. Little Emma, she needs a woman who knows about babies." "I know that," Daniel said, hammering a nail with more force than necessary. "But where am I supposed to find a woman willing to take this on? Most women want to marry for love, not to become an instant mother to 3 children, one of them a sickly infant." "There are women back east who would come," Miguel said carefully. "Women who answer advertisements, mail-order brides they call them." Daniel had heard of such arrangements, of course. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and these were certainly desperate times. That evening, after he had finally gotten all 3 children to sleep, He sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pencil and tried to figure out what to write. How did a man advertise for a wife? How did he put into words that he needed someone capable and kind, someone who would love his children even though they were not her own, someone who would be a true partner in this hard life in the end? He kept it simple and honest. Widower rancher in Yuma, Arizona Territory, seeks capable woman for marriage. 3 children, including infant. Hard work but honest life. Must be kind and good with children. Will provide home and security. Serious inquiries only. He sent the advertisement to newspapers in 3 eastern cities and tried not to think too hard about what he was doing. He was essentially asking a complete stranger to marry him, to leave behind everything she knew, to come to a harsh land and take on the monumental task of mothering his children. It seemed impossible that anyone would answer, but answer they did. Over the next month, Daniel received 14 letters from women of varying ages and circumstances, all expressing interest in his proposition. Some were clearly desperate, their letters barely literate and reeking of whiskey even through the paper. Others were too flowery and romantic, speaking of love at first sight and fairy tale endings, which told Daniel they had no real understanding of what they would be facing. A few seemed sensible enough, but something in their words felt cold or calculating, and Daniel could not imagine trusting his children to them. Then, in early December, he received a letter that was different from all the others. The handwriting was clear and steady, the words thoughtful and direct. Dear Mr. Easton, my name is Adelaide Carter. I am 24 years old, unmarried, and currently working as a schoolteacher in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I was raised on a farm in rural Pennsylvania and am accustomed to hard work. I have 6 younger siblings whom I helped to raise after my mother became ill when I was 12. I know how to care for infants and children, how to run a household, how to cook and clean and manage a home. I am also educated and can teach your children their letters and numbers. I will be honest with you. I am not answering your advertisement because I am desperate or because I have romantic notions about the West. I am answering because I believe I could do genuine good for your children, and because I am ready for a different life than the one I have here. My mother passed away 2 years ago. My father remarried a woman who made it clear I am no longer welcome in their home, and my position as a teacher ends this spring. I am practical, hardworking, and kind. I do not expect love, but I do expect respect and honesty. If these terms are acceptable to you, I would be willing to come to Yuma and see if we might make a suitable match. Sincerely, Adelaide Carter. Daniel read the letter 3 times, and each time he felt something ease in his chest. There was no false sentiment, no desperate pleading, just a straightforward assessment of the situation and what she could offer. She sounded capable and sensible, and more than that, she sounded real. He could picture her, this Adelaide Carter, with her clear handwriting and her honest words, and he thought maybe, just maybe, this could work. He wrote back immediately, telling her more about the ranch, about the children, about what life in Yuma was actually like. He did not sugarcoat anything. He told her about the heat in summer, the dust storms, the isolation, the hard work. He told her about Thomas's nightmares and Sarah's silence and Emma's fragility. He told her he needed someone strong because this life was not for the faint of heart. Then he waited, half expecting that his honesty would scare her away. Her reply came faster than he expected. She wrote that she appreciated his candor, that she was not afraid of hard work or harsh conditions, and that she was particularly moved by his concern for his children. She asked practical questions about the journey, about what she should bring, about what he expected from their marriage. Daniel answered every question honestly. Yes, he expected it to be a real marriage in all ways, though he would give her time to adjust. Yes, she would have authority over the household and the children's daily care. Yes, he would treat her with respect and expect the same in return. They exchanged 3 more letters over the next month, and with each one, Daniel felt more certain that Adelaide Carter might be the answer to his prayers. In February of 1883, Daniel received a telegram informing him that Adelaide would arrive in Yuma on the 23rd of the month. He had 3 days to prepare. Miguel's wife, Rosa, helped him clean the house from top to bottom. They moved Martha's things out of the bedroom, which felt both necessary and like a betrayal. Daniel stood in the doorway of the room he had shared with his first wife and felt the weight of his guilt. Was he dishonoring Martha's memory by bringing another woman into their home so soon? But then Emma started crying in the other room, and he went to pick her up and felt how light she still was, how weak, and he knew he was doing the right thing. Martha would have wanted their children cared for. She would have understood. The day Adelaide was set to arrive, Daniel dressed in his best clothes, made sure the children were clean and presentable, and drove the wagon into town to meet the stage. His heart was pounding in a way it had not since he was a young man courting Martha. What if Adelaide took one look at him, at Yuma, at the reality of what she had agreed to, and got right back on that stage? What if she was nothing like her letters? What if this was a terrible mistake? The stage arrived in a cloud of dust right on time. Daniel stood beside his wagon, holding Emma in one arm while Thomas and Sarah pressed against his legs, all of them watching as the driver helped a woman down from the coach. She was average height, slender but not frail, with light brown hair pulled back in a simple bun and wearing a practical gray traveling dress. She was not beautiful in any conventional sense, but there was something striking about her face, something in the directness of her gaze and the set of her shoulders that spoke of strength and determination. She looked around the dusty street of Yuma with an expression of assessment rather than dismay, and when her eyes landed on Daniel and the children, she smiled. It was not a practiced smile or a fake one. It was warm and genuine, and it reached her hazel eyes, and Daniel felt something shift in his chest, something he had not expected to feel. Adelaide walked toward them, her step confident despite what must have been an exhausting journey. "Mr. Easton," she said, and her voice was clear and pleasant with a slight Eastern accent. "Yes, madam," Daniel said, suddenly aware of how rough he must look to her, how crude this town must seem compared to Philadelphia. "And you must be Miss Carter. These are my children, Thomas, Sarah, and this is Emma." Adelaide looked at each child in turn, and Daniel watched her face carefully. Thomas was staring at his shoes, shy and uncertain. Sarah was sucking her thumb, something she had started doing after Martha died. Emma was fussing in Daniel's arms, making little mewling sounds that tore at his heart. He saw Adelaide's expression soften as she took in the 3 grieving, struggling children. "Hello, Thomas," she said gently, crouching down to his level. "I am very pleased to meet you. And you, Sarah, what a pretty dress you are wearing." Then she looked up at Daniel, at Emma in his arms, and he saw her eyes widen with concern. "May I?" she asked, holding out her arms. Daniel passed Emma to her, watching as Adelaide cradled the infant with practiced ease. She pulled back the blanket slightly, studying Emma's face, and Daniel saw the worry flash across her features. "How long has she been this thin?" Adelaide asked quietly. "Since birth," Daniel admitted. "She is not thriving. I have been giving her goat's milk, but she does not seem to be gaining weight." "The milk may be too rich," Adelaide said, still looking at Emma. "And she may have trouble digesting it. There are things we can try. I helped my mother with my youngest brother when he had similar troubles." She looked up at Daniel then, and he saw determination in her eyes. "We will figure this out, Mr. Easton. Emma is going to be fine." The certainty in her voice did something to Daniel. For the first time since Martha died, he felt a flicker of hope. They collected Adelaide's trunk from the stage and loaded it into the wagon. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Adelaide sat beside Daniel on the bench, holding Emma, while Thomas and Sarah sat in the back on top of the luggage. Daniel found himself acutely aware of her presence, of the competent way she held his daughter, of the way she looked around at the landscape with interest rather than horror. "It is beautiful in its own way," she said after a while, surprising him. "Very different from Pennsylvania, but beautiful." "Most people think it is just empty and brown," Daniel said. "Most people do not look carefully enough," Adelaide replied. "There is beauty in harsh places if you know how to see it." When they reached the ranch, Daniel helped her down from the wagon and showed her around. The house was small but sturdy, built of adobe with a covered porch that provided some relief from the sun. There were 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a main room, and not much else. Adelaide walked through each room, and Daniel tried to see it through her eyes. It was rough and plain compared to what she must be used to, but she did not seem disappointed. "It is a good house," she said finally. "Strong and well built. The children's room could use some curtains, and the kitchen needs better organization, but it is a good home." Rosa had left a meal prepared for them, and they sat around the table for an awkward first dinner. Thomas and Sarah barely ate, too nervous and confused by this stranger in their house. Emma fussed in the cradle Daniel had placed beside the table. Adelaide ate with good appetite, complimenting the food, and tried to draw the older children into conversation, but they remained stubbornly silent. After dinner, Adelaide asked if she might try feeding Emma. Daniel watched as she went into the kitchen and did something to the goat's milk, diluting it and warming it carefully. Then she sat in the rocking chair and fed Emma with a patience and gentleness that made Daniel's throat tight. The baby took the milk more easily than she had in weeks, and when Adelaide looked up at Daniel with a small smile of triumph, he felt something crack open in his chest. "I should clarify our arrangements," Daniel said after the children were finally asleep and he and Adelaide were sitting in the main room. "We can have the ceremony tomorrow if you are willing. The preacher in town will marry us. As for sleeping arrangements, I meant what I wrote. I understand you need time to adjust. You can have the main bedroom, and I will sleep out here until you are ready for this to be a real marriage." Adelaide was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. "Mr. Easton, I appreciate your consideration, but I think we should be clear about expectations. I came here to be your wife in all ways. I am not a delicate flower who needs to be handled with kid gloves. I am a practical woman entering into a practical arrangement. While I do not expect love, I do expect that we will build a partnership. If we are to be married, then we should be married. Waiting will only make things more awkward." Her directness startled him, but he found he appreciated it. "Then we will have the ceremony tomorrow," he said. "And tomorrow night, we will begin as husband and wife." "Agreed," Adelaide said. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Now, if you will show me where things are, I would like to prepare some things for Emma for tomorrow. That baby needs proper care, and the sooner we start, the better." Daniel showed her where everything was stored, and then he stood in the doorway of the kitchen watching as Adelaide moved around with quiet efficiency. Preparing bottles and measuring ingredients for what she said was a special formula that had helped her infant brother. She moved like she belonged there, like she had always been there, and Daniel felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not just hope, but the sense that maybe, just maybe, Everything was going to be all right. They were married the next afternoon in a brief ceremony at the small church in Yuma. Adelaide wore a simple blue dress, and Daniel wore his Sunday best. Miguel and Rosa stood as witnesses, and Thomas and Sarah sat in the front pew looking confused and sad. Daniel felt the weight of what he was doing as he spoke his vows. He was marrying a woman he barely knew, binding their lives together, asking her to take on the monumental task of raising his children. But when Adelaide spoke her own vows, her voice steady and clear, and when she looked at him with those hazel eyes that seemed to see right through to his soul, he felt that maybe this was not just practical. Maybe this was right. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Daniel and Adelaide stood in the bedroom that was now theirs, and the awkwardness Daniel had expected was there, but not overwhelmingly so. Adelaide was matter-of-fact about it, undressing behind the screen and coming to bed in a modest nightgown, her hair down for the first time since Daniel had met her. It fell past her shoulders in soft waves, and he realized with some surprise that she was actually quite lovely. "I have never done this before," Adelaide said quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "But I am not afraid. I understand what is expected." Daniel sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. "I will be gentle," he said. "I know this is not a love match, but I will never hurt you, Adelaide. I promise you that." "I believe you," she said, and she reached out and took his hand. What happened next was tentative and awkward at times, but also surprisingly tender. Daniel had been with only one woman before, his first wife, and he had loved Martha deeply. This was different. This was two strangers coming together out of necessity and practicality. But as he touched Adelaide, as she responded to him with a mix of nervousness and trust, Daniel felt something unexpected. Not love, not yet, but the potential for it. The sense that this woman, with her direct gaze and her capable hands and her unexpected strength, might become more to him than just a solution to his problems. Afterward, they lay in the dark, not touching but aware of each other. "Thank you," Adelaide said quietly, "for being kind." "You do not need to thank me for basic decency," Daniel said. "You would be surprised how rare basic decency can be," Adelaide replied, and there was something in her voice that made Daniel wonder what her life had been like before she came to him. Over the next weeks, Adelaide transformed their lives. She was up before dawn every day, tending to Emma with a dedication that bordered on fierce. She had been right about the milk, and with her special formula and constant care, Emma began to gain weight. Color came back into her cheeks, and she started to make sounds that were not just crying. Daniel would come in from the fields to find Adelaide rocking Emma and singing to her in a sweet, clear voice, and something in his chest would tighten every time. But it was not just Emma that Adelaide cared for. She worked patiently with Sarah, never pushing but always gentle, until one day Sarah finally spoke to her, asking for a drink of water, and Adelaide's face lit up with such joy that Daniel had to look away from the intensity of it. She helped Thomas with his nightmares, sitting with him in the dark and talking to him about his mother, telling him it was all right to miss her, that missing someone meant you had loved them well. Thomas started sleeping through the night again. The house itself changed under Adelaide's care. She made curtains for the windows, organized the kitchen, started a small garden, cooked meals that were actually edible and often delicious. She did laundry and mended clothes and kept everything clean without making it feel like she was criticizing how Daniel had been managing before. She was simply there, steady and capable, making everything better. And slowly, gradually, the children began to respond to her. Thomas started following her around, asking her questions, seeking her approval. Sarah began to smile again, even laugh, especially when Adelaide would play simple games with her or let her help with baking. Emma thrived under her care, growing stronger every day, and Daniel would sometimes catch Adelaide just holding the baby and looking at her with such love that it made his heart ache. But it was not just the children Adelaide was healing. She was healing Daniel too, though he did not fully realize it at first. She would sit with him in the evenings after the children were asleep, and they would talk about the ranch, about the children, about nothing and everything. She listened when he talked about Martha, never jealous or uncomfortable, just understanding. She told him about her own life, about growing up on a farm, about her mother's long illness and her father's remarriage and the loneliness she had felt in Philadelphia. "I was so alone there," she said one night. "Surrounded by people but completely alone. I felt like I was just going through the motions of living, not actually alive. When I saw your advertisement, something in me recognized it. You were alone too, even surrounded by your children. We were both drowning, just in different ways." "And now," Daniel asked, looking at her across the table. "Now I feel like I can breathe again," Adelaide said simply. "Like I have a purpose, like I matter." "You do matter," Daniel said, and he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. "You matter to the children. You matter to this family. You matter to me." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Daniel saw something shift in her expression. It was early May, nearly 3 months since she had arrived, and he realized with a start that he was falling in love with his practical, no-nonsense wife who had come to him as a stranger and was becoming essential to his existence. Their physical relationship had continued, a twice-weekly occurrence that was pleasant but still somehow separate from their daily lives. But that night, after their conversation, when they came together in the darkness of their bedroom, it felt different. Daniel touched her with more care, more attention, wanting to give her pleasure and not just fulfill an obligation. And when Adelaide responded to him with a passion she had not shown before, when she pulled him closer and kissed him with real feeling, Daniel felt something fundamental shift between them. "Adelaide," he whispered against her hair afterward, both of them breathless and tangled together. "I need you to know something. This has become more than practical for me. You have become more than just a solution. I am falling in love with you." He felt her go still in his arms, and for a moment he feared he had ruined everything by speaking too soon. But then she turned to face him, her hand coming up to touch his cheek in the darkness. "I am glad," she whispered, "because I am falling in love with you too. I did not expect it, did not plan for it, but Daniel, you are a good man, the best man I have ever known. How could I not love you?" They kissed then, deep and long, and when they made love again, it was different than it had ever been before. It was not just two people fulfilling an obligation or even seeking mutual pleasure. It was two people who were falling in love, expressing something that went beyond words. The next morning, Daniel woke to find Adelaide already up and in the kitchen, humming as she prepared breakfast. Emma was cooing in her cradle. Thomas and Sarah were setting the table without being asked, and the morning sun was streaming through the windows Adelaide had cleaned until they sparkled. Daniel stood in the doorway watching his family, this family that Adelaide had helped him rebuild, and felt a contentment he had not known was possible after Martha's death. But life in the Arizona territory was never simple for long. In late June, when the heat was becoming oppressive and everyone was moving slowly through the thick air, Miguel came riding up to the house with news that rustlers had been spotted in the area. Several ranches had lost cattle, and there was talk that it was an organized gang rather than just opportunistic thieves. Daniel immediately went into planning mode, organizing night watches with Miguel and the other hands, making sure the cattle were moved to pastures closer to the house where they could be better protected. Adelaide watched him prepare with worry clear on her face, and the night he was set to ride out for the first watch, she stopped him at the door. "Be careful," she said, her hand on his arm. "Please, Daniel, the children need you, I need you." He pulled her close, holding her tight. "I will be careful," he promised. "I have too much to live for now to take foolish risks." The rustlers struck 3 nights later, but not at Daniel's ranch. They hit the Morrison place, 5 miles east, and by the time help arrived, they had made off with nearly 50 head of cattle and had shot John Morrison in the leg when he tried to stop them. The whole community was up in arms, and a posse was quickly organized to track down the thieves. Daniel felt torn. He wanted to help, wanted to see justice done, but he also did not want to leave Adelaide and the children alone and unprotected. It was Adelaide who made the decision for him. "You have to go," she said firmly when he expressed his doubts. "John Morrison is your neighbor and your friend. You cannot leave him unavenged. Miguel will stay here with us. I know how to shoot a rifle, Daniel. My father taught me when I was 12. We will be fine." "You know how to shoot?" Daniel asked, surprised. "I told you I grew up on a farm," Adelaide said with the hint of a smile. "Did you think that was just sewing and cooking? I can shoot, ride, and do most things a man can do. I just prefer not to advertise it. Now go, help catch those rustlers, but come back to me safely." Daniel joined the posse, and they tracked the rustlers for 3 days through the harsh desert terrain, before finally catching up with them near the California border. There was a brief but intense gunfight, and Daniel took a bullet that grazed his arm, but in the end, the rustlers were captured and most of the stolen cattle recovered. The wound was not serious, but it bled freely and hurt like hell, and all Daniel could think about as the town doctor bandaged, it was getting home to Adelaide. He rode in just after sunset, exhausted and dirty and hurting, and before he could even dismount, Adelaide was running out of the house toward him. She helped him down from the horse, saw the blood on his sleeve, and her face went white. "You are hurt," she said, her voice shaking. "It is just a graze," Daniel assured her. "The doctor already cleaned and bandaged it. I am fine, Adelaide. I am home." She threw her arms around him then, careful of his injured arm, and he felt her trembling against him. "I was so worried," she whispered. "I kept thinking about what I would do if you did not come back, how I would tell the children, how I would go on without you. Daniel, I cannot lose you. I just found you." He held her close with his good arm, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. "You are not going to lose me," he promised. "I told you I would come back safely, and I did. I will always come back to you, Adelaide. Always." That night, after the children were asleep and Adelaide had checked his bandage 3 times to make sure it was not bleeding through, they lay in bed and held each other close. "I realized something while you were gone," Adelaide said quietly. "I realized that I love you so much it terrifies me. I came here expecting a practical arrangement, maybe friendship, maybe contentment. But this, what I feel for you, it is so much more than that. You are in my heart, Daniel Easton, so deep that I do not think you could ever be removed." Daniel turned to her, cupping her face with his good hand. "Good," he said, "because you are in mine too. I loved Martha and I will always honor her memory. But what I feel for you, Adelaide, it is different but just as real. You saved me. You saved all of us. You took a broken family and made us whole again. You are not just a mother to my children. You are the woman who mothers my soul." She kissed him then, and they made love carefully because of his injury, but with an intensity of feeling that left them both shaken. Afterward, as Adelaide curled against his uninjured side and he held her close, Daniel thought about how strange life was. He had placed that advertisement expecting, at best, to find someone competent to care for his children. Instead, he had found the woman he was meant to spend his life with, his true partner, his love. As summer progressed into fall, Daniel healed and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children flourished under Adelaide's care. Emma, now nearly a year old, was chubby and healthy and had just started taking her first wobbly steps. She adored Adelaide, reaching for her constantly, crying when Adelaide left a room. Thomas, now 6, had started proper lessons with Adelaide as his teacher, and he was proving to be a bright student who loved learning. Sarah, at 4, was talking nonstop now, making up for all those months of silence, and she followed Adelaide around like a shadow, wanting to help with everything. But it was not just the children's relationship with Adelaide that had deepened. Daniel and Adelaide had grown closer in ways he had not anticipated. They worked together seamlessly, running the ranch and the household as a true partnership. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They laughed together, which Daniel had not thought he would do again so soon after Martha's death. They made love with increasing frequency and passion, learning each other's bodies and hearts with growing intimacy. In October, Adelaide came to Daniel with news that made his heart soar. She was pregnant. They had created a child together, a symbol of their love and their partnership. Daniel picked her up and spun her around, making her laugh and protest that he should be careful. The children were thrilled at the prospect of a new baby, especially Emma, who did not quite understand but could sense the excitement. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Adelaide continued to work hard, though Daniel tried to get her to rest more. She refused to be treated like an invalid, insisting that she was healthy and strong and perfectly capable of doing everything she normally did. Daniel learned to pick his battles, making sure she had help with the heavy work, but letting her maintain her independence in other ways. In March of 1884, Adelaide gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named David, after Daniel's grandfather. The birth was easier than Daniel had feared, with Rosa attending and everything going smoothly. When Daniel finally got to hold his son, looking down at the tiny face and perfect little hands, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This child was a gift, a new beginning, proof that life continued and that love could triumph over loss. Adelaide was a natural mother to David, just as she had been to Thomas, Sarah, and Emma. But what struck Daniel most was how the older children loved their new brother. Thomas was protective and gentle. Sarah wanted to help with everything. Emma, now walking and talking, was fascinated by the baby and would bring him toys and pat his head carefully. They were a real family, blended and built from loss and necessity and practical arrangements, but held together now by genuine love. That spring and summer were some of the happiest months of Daniel's life. The ranch was doing well, the children were thriving, and his marriage to Adelaide had become the center of his world. They had long since moved past any awkwardness or uncertainty. They were partners in every sense, working together, raising their family together, building a life together. One evening in August, after all the children were asleep, Daniel and Adelaide sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Adelaide was nursing David, and Daniel had his arm around her shoulders, and everything felt right with the world. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked quietly. "Answering my advertisement, coming out here to marry a stranger?" Adelaide looked up at him, her eyes soft in the fading light. "Not for a single moment," she said. "This is the life I was meant to have. You are the man I was meant to love. These children are the family I was meant to raise. Everything that came before was just leading me here to you, to this. I placed that advertisement because I needed a mother for my children," Daniel said, pulling her closer. "But I found so much more than that. I found a partner, a friend, a lover. I found the woman who healed my broken heart and showed me that it was possible to love again." You mother my children, yes, but Adelaide, you mother my soul. You nurture every part of me, make me want to be a better man, give me reasons to hope and dream and love. I cannot imagine my life without you now." "Then it is good you will never have to," Adelaide said, reaching up to kiss him softly. "I am yours, Daniel, for the rest of my life. Through whatever comes, through hard times and good, through sickness and health, through everything. I am yours and you are mine." As the years passed, that promise held true. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Martha in honor of Daniel's first wife, which Adelaide had suggested, and another son they named Samuel. The older children grew, each finding their own paths. Thomas took to ranching with a passion, working alongside his father and eventually taking over more of the daily operations. Sarah proved to have a gift for animals, especially horses, and became known throughout the territory for her way with even the most difficult mounts. Emma, as she grew, showed her mother Adelaide's gift for teaching and eventually started a small school in Yuma for the growing number of children in the area. David, Samuel, and little Martha grew up never knowing a time when their family was not whole and happy. To them, Adelaide had always been there, loving and constant, and Daniel had always been the strong, steady presence at the center of their world. Daniel and Adelaide's love deepened with every passing year. They faced challenges, of course. There were droughts that threatened the ranch, illnesses that scared them, moments of conflict and disagreement. But they faced everything together, their partnership strong enough to weather any storm. They worked side by side, built their life side by side, grew old side by side. On their 20th wedding anniversary, in February of 1903, Daniel took Adelaide back to Yuma, to the same church where they had married. The children kept the ranch for the day, and Daniel and Adelaide renewed their vows in a small, private ceremony. It was just the 2 of them and the preacher, but it meant everything. "20 years ago, I married you out of necessity," Daniel said, holding both of Adelaide's hands and looking into the eyes of the woman who had been his wife, his partner, his love for 2 decades. "I needed a mother for my children, and I found that in you. But I also found so much more. I found my soulmate, my best friend, the love of my life. You have given me everything, Adelaide. You have made me the man I am today. You have given me a life worth living. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, more than I did yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. You are my heart, my home, my everything." Adelaide was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. "You gave me a purpose when I had none," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a family when I was alone. You gave me love when I thought I would never have it. These 20 years have been the best of my life, Daniel. Every day with you has been a gift. Every moment with our children has been a blessing. I came here as a stranger answering an advertisement, but I became myself in your arms. You are my home, Daniel Easton. You always will be." They kissed then, and it was like their first kiss and also nothing like it. It was a kiss that held 20 years of love, of partnership, of building a life together. It was a kiss that promised 20 more years and beyond, whatever time they were given. As they walked out of the church hand in hand, the Arizona sun warm on their faces, Daniel thought about that desperate telegram 21 years ago, about the broken man he had been, about the practical advertisement he had placed looking for help. He had needed a mother for his children, and he had found that and so much more. He had found Adelaide, the woman who had mothered not just his children but his very soul, who had taken a shattered family and made them whole, who had shown him that love could come in unexpected ways and be all the stronger for it. Their life had not been perfect, but it had been real and good and full of love. They had built something beautiful together, something that would last beyond their lifetimes in the children they had raised and the legacy they would leave behind. That evening back at the ranch, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, for Thomas had married and had 2 children of his own, Daniel stood and raised his glass. "To Adelaide," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "The woman who saved us all. The woman who taught us that family is not just about blood, but about love and choice and showing up every day. The woman who is my heart and my home. To my wife, my partner, my love. To Adelaide." Everyone chorused, and Adelaide blushed and laughed and told them all to stop making a fuss. But Daniel could see the joy in her eyes, the satisfaction of a life well lived, of love freely given and fully returned. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, the same room they had shared for 20 years, Daniel and Adelaide lay in each other's arms. "We did well, did we not?" Adelaide said softly. "With our life, with our family, we did better than well," Daniel said, kissing her forehead. "We did beautifully. And it is all because of you, Adelaide. You came into our lives like an answer to a prayer, and you have been our blessing every day since." "We were each other's blessing," Adelaide corrected. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, Daniel. We saved each other." She was right, Daniel knew. He had needed a mother for his children, but what he had really needed was Adelaide herself. The practical woman with the steady hands and the kind heart who had seen past his desperation to the man underneath. The woman who had chosen to love him and his children, who had built this life with him piece by piece, day by day, year by year. As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Daniel sent up a silent prayer of thanks. For Adelaide, for their children, for the life they had built together. For finding love when he thought he had lost it forever. For the woman who had answered a simple advertisement and changed everything. Their story was not one of love at first sight or dramatic romance. It was better than that. It was a story of 2 people who had come together out of practical need and had chosen, day after day, to build something real and lasting. It was a story of healing and hope, of family and faith, of partnership and love that deepened with time rather than fading. Years later, when Daniel was an old man and Adelaide's hair had turned completely silver, he would still reach for her hand as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. And she would still look at him with those hazel eyes that saw straight into his soul. And they would both know that they had found something rare and precious, not perfect but real, not easy but worth it, not what they had expected but exactly what they both had needed. He had placed an advertisement for a mother for his children. He had found Adelaide Carter, the woman who mothered his soul, who healed his heart, who became his everything. And that, Daniel thought as he held his wife close and felt the steady beat of her heart against his, was the greatest blessing a man could ask for. Not just someone to help him survive, but someone to help him truly live. Not just someone to fill a role, but someone to share his life with in every possible way. Their love story was not the one Daniel had imagined when he married Martha all those years ago. But it was the one he had needed, the one that had saved him, the one that had given him a future when he thought he had none. It was the story of 2 practical people making a practical arrangement that turned into something extraordinary. It was proof that love could come when you least expected it, in forms you did not anticipate, and be all the more powerful for being a choice rather than just a feeling. And as the years continued to pass, as their family continued to grow, as they faced the joys and sorrows that life brought their way, Daniel and Adelaide faced it all together. Hand in hand, heart to heart, soul to soul. The way they always had, the way they always would, until the end of their days. A testament to the power of love, the strength of partnership, and the beauty of two people who found each other exactly when they both needed it most.